This is the challenge that I find, David. Focus in people's attention, because there really is there's a lot of distractions, and there's a lot of bread and circus, as they say.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output. But very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the Grand Solar Minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
This is the uphill battle that we have, and we don't have a whole lot of time. Sadly, we don't have a whole lot of time. You know, you've been sounding the call for probably, a couple, 2-3 years now. I don't know how old your channel is, but it's got to be at least 2 or 3 years, perhaps even more. So you've been in front of this for quite some time, but it's just now. For as long as you've been putting out this information, great information, I recommend people to your channel all the time. You're giving out great information. And even just now, with all the work that you've been doing, John Casey and many others, we're just now starting to see it barely creep into the mainstream. It's way too late. It's way too late.
Yeah, I would agree. It is too late. But I've been doing the channel since late October in 2014 when I did my first couple videos.
Wow, it's been that long, huh?
Yeah, but back then I would do like one every 10 days. I would do like 3 or 4 a month, maybe. And I tell you what, the amount of ridicule and just the ridiculous comments and a gamut of things that I've received in these years talking about something so simple as, hey, there's a possible other explanation that we're going to go through a cycle, and instead of global warming that's happening, it's probably going to cool based on past historical cycles. And I knew a lot of information coming from our satellites are showing that, hey, the sun is going to repeat something. It's behaving a little differently. It's given me a thick skin, really, because if anybody could walk in my shoes for just a few minutes and see the things I've experienced, not only at work where I had to quit a job because of this thing, and it was the point where you either quit your channel or you quit this job, and I quit the job, of course. I'm not going to quit the channel. But then at the same time, that's just one part of it. But then the amount of overwhelmingly positive comments, especially this last 2 years, whether it's hitting the mainstream media or not, people are becoming more and more aware. And what I've noticed, since the inception of the channel, the beginning of it, at that time it was a lot of negative because everybody was just so heavily indoctrinated in CO2 and was still warming a little bit. But since these last couple of years, temperatures are dropping and there's been these extreme weather events, which were predicted during the change of the jet streams and weakening magnetosphere, increasing cosmic rays. A lot more. I rarely get negative comments anymore. I really very rarely get them anymore. But in the beginning, it was a trudge and to get through. At some points I was like, geez, I don't even know. Should I continue this channel here? This is a bunch of hate speech and just junk coming through. And then a few others told me, no, man, you're over the target. That's why you're getting the flack. You need to continue the message. If you believe it, you got to continue it. So I'm glad I did, because it's done 2 things for me. First, it's given me the heads up and to look in the crystal ball and really, be able to help people, and including my family and myself and friends, understand these changes that are coming, because they're a little freaked out right now because what I was talking about a few years ago is here now. And they're like, whoa, you said all that stuff was going to happen and now it's happening. What do you see in the next couple of years? And I'm like, you don't want to know, really. You don't want to know. We can talk about it, but you don't want to know, truly. It's a reset. It's a reset. Like, we're going to go back into pioneer lifestyle living, kind of a reset. Maybe because of a solar flare, maybe not, but just because of the divisional infighting between everybody on the planet here. It's race, economics, belief system. It's You're leftist, you're rightist, you're whatever you are. There's somebody completely 100% 180 against you with like, it's not even, nobody has a conversation anymore. And that's the problem. Everybody just screams. I try to initiate conversations, but people always like to scream when I like to talk. It's interesting. And the distractions that you mentioned, you know, they're going to get wilder. They're going to get crazier. This is how they're going to keep you distracted from the rising food prices and the real reasons for it. Everything is going to be Hollywood-esque times 10. The fires that we experienced in California, not myself personally, but I saw, on the news feeds, et cetera. I mean, so much news time was devoted to that, and like the camera angles, and it was as wild as any Hollywood disaster movie you've ever seen. But then they added the real human element where they like pulled your emotions in, and they should be too, because those were real people affected by these events. So this is an example of the increase in distraction of Hollywood-esqueness. I would imagine probably something going to try to impeach Trump. I'm going to say in the mid-2019, just to try to get that whole Hollywood-esque, because 2019, when the harvest season comes in, those non-believers out there will quickly be turned into believers, because when you're looking at 10, 20, 30% jumps in the futures prices just because lack of crops in every zone across the planet. Australia is going into a mega drought. They're going to be down under, 2 million tons this year. Now, you got to think about that. Australia used to be a major exporter. They used to produce like 12 million tons of grain. They were a major exporter, but this year they need to import. Okay. You got to think about the push and pull around the planet. South Africa is completely offline due to the politics. Now they're importers, and they used to export to the rest of Africa. So those northern African nations, now their food prices are up again. Now the riots are starting again, but it's not because of government, suppression anymore. It's just because food prices are rising. So where are those countries going to get their food from, their grains from? Because Russia's down, Europe's down, United States was down, hard red winter wheat. Oh my gosh, should have seen the crush on that this year. Billions and billions and billions of dollars lost in Canadian crops. So if the exporters, such as Australia and South Africa, are now importers, this is going to throw a whole cog in the wheels here. The mechanism is going to freeze up somewhere where people just aren't going to get. And if they do get, it's going to cost them way more, because there's premiums already out on all the, I know it's harvest season now. So if you're looking at the futures prices, some of them are coming down. It's harvest season. You got a glut of whatever's being harvested. Wait a few more months until that's all moved through the supply chain and see what happens with the prices. As soon as they go up again, they're going record. So this political instability, and they're going to all cover it in a Hollywood, Bollywood-esque bread and circuses ultra fest as we move into 2019, 2021. And when people start fighting on the streets for food and the army's brought out and martial laws declared, et cetera, in cities, and police state is in full working order, at that point, I don't know where they're going to go, because at that point, it'll be more of a, I don't know, how Hollywood-esque it can get, James. I'm not sure how far do you think they can push the envelope before people go, whoa, 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 stop. At that point, I don't know how far you have to push people to make them go to that and say stop. Because once everybody says stop, it stops.
And this episode's brought to you by TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds since 1974. Full range of garden seeds, microgreen seeds, sprouting seeds, wheatgrass, grain seeds, flower seeds, herb seeds, and ground cover crop. I encourage you to take a look at their website, TrueLeafMarket.com, and they even have free starter guides there for you to learn how to grow sprouts, microgreens, herbs, and wheatgrass. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
No, it does. We have a lot more power than we think. California is the breadbasket of the nation, right? Isn't that where most all of the large majority of crops and stuff are grown? I don't know the percentage, but a lot of stuff comes from California. Right. And they're burning it out, man. And it looked to me like it was not a doctored video, but I've seen more than one, and one very, very convincing video, David, where it looked like there was some rays or something, some directed energy weapons coming from the sky into the ground, igniting stuff. I sent it over to a few people with the video, and if I could pull it back up again, I would. Sent over to a few people to look at it because I looked at it a few times and went, man, if this is a fraud, this is really a brilliant fraud. And they thought it was real too. Now, I interviewed Paul Preston, my friend Paul Preston. I'm not sure if you know Paul, but he lives right out there, and right out there in California. He was right in Paradise, did a couple of broadcasts from there. You know, we talked about the houses, like on a street. There'd be, you know, a house not damaged, house not damaged, house not damaged, a house burned out. Then next to it, house not damaged, house not damaged. And like 2 and 3 and 4 streets in a row, there would be 4 or 5 houses that were perfectly in standing, looking like nothing ever happened. And right in the middle of it, there'd be a house like burned down to the ground, like to ashes. But the trees around the house didn't burn, or the houses around it. So something's going on, David, with this. If we switch gears a little bit here, I don't know if you've done research and studied this, but there is something going on with this directed energy weapon. Like you talked about a year ago, we talked about axles on cars melting and rims melting. And like the point I made with that interview with Paul Preston, and we're just using round numbers, I'm not using the actual numbers. But if it takes 1,000 degrees for metal to melt and wood only burns at 550, it's just a math equation. The wood, and as I said, these aren't the real numbers, but generally speaking, the wood is not burned hot enough to melt the steel. Something with this California fires, there's something going on with these directed energy weapons. And, you know, I wouldn't even have to see the directed energy weapons, but I see the homes that are burned out in neighborhoods, and none of the plants or trees or anything around it's burned out. I mean, did you see those photos, David? And what's your thoughts? This is Revolution Radio, right? So I've spoken about much deeper conspiracies than this. What do you think about this whole directed energy weapon thing? Do you see it the same way, or am I just a fruitcake? Or both? Maybe I'm a fruitcake too. You know, you never know.
I think we would need to talk to Mr. Tesla and Mr. Marconi and bring them into the conversation to have this understanding of directed energy weapons. It's not something new. It's not as if they just made a directed energy weapon and it's like, oh, state-of-the-art technology 2017, 18. No way. Patents for this stuff were almost a century ago. Although with our new types of electronics, you know, we can do a much better job at what we can create as an end product, but the mechanisms still remain the same. There's a finite amount of workings in the universe, and plasma and all these other energy drivers, and how atoms and molecules move, and a vibrational frequency. There's only a certain range of frequencies. You can't create new frequencies. There's a set range. So we're just really, you talked about cycles. We're coming back to cycles again. I mean, you want to talk about the conspiracy. We should be talking about free energy and these types of what is now directed energy weapons is the same technology that could be used for free energy. Now, if you're going to use it to start a fire, I'm sure you can use it to boil water. I'm sure you can use it to split atoms. I'm sure you could use it to do hydrolysis. There's so many other applications for this where we wouldn't have to pay for power as long as we live. I mean, you take a look here. I was doing a little bit of study on this. It's off Principia Scientifica International, and it's talking about anti-gravitics. Otis Carr, C-A-R-R, and the anti-gravity technologies that he had back in the 1950s to use for electrical generation. And he was arrested, and all of his workings were confiscated because he didn't want to sell it. He didn't want to turn it into a weaponized usage. So again, here we go back 1950s, and we're already talking about anti-gravity technologies. Now think about that. If you could make a train weightless, you could make your car just weigh a few pounds, how much less energy would we use? But then if we coupled it with what you're talking about, directed energy weapons, they don't have to be directed in such a point that it actually melts rock. What if you diffused it where it was enough to propel something? So when we start to get into this directed energy weapon, I'm right there with you. I know they exist, but they also exist for other purposes, like free energy that we could be having. Instead of a lot of people using their waking moments to get some crappy job they don't want to be at, to get some green dollars so they can continue to pay for their house, for their electricity, for the gasoline they use in their cars or diesel for their trucks. And the high-priced foods that we don't grow in our own yards, and all the just-in-time delivery chain that's running on all the energy that we're consuming across the planet to make this whole thing run, we could do it for almost free or nothing if we use the same exact thing that they weaponized and turn it into good for humanity. That's where the real conspiracy is. And yes, these directed energy weapons, James, we talked about this exactly a year ago. Same scenario, same images, things melting and 2 feet away, vinyl replacement siding didn't even melt, yet 2 feet or 3 feet to the left, rock melted. Come on, man. There's something way wrong with those where plastic doesn't melt literally feet away from where rocks and metal had liquefied. Or I should say, the reading between the lines of how we can use the same technology for good or evil.
Well, I'm going to throw this out here since we're talking about conspiracies. Well, this is not a conspiracy, but I don't know the last part. Of course, you probably are aware that about Tesla. You mentioned Tesla, Trump's uncle. I want to say, I don't think his name was Fred. Maybe his dad's name is Fred. I remember Trump's uncle was the one that was in charge. I think he worked for the government, a government agency. He was in charge of collecting all of the information from Tesla's laboratories after his death, which was taken and really confiscated by the federal government. I don't know all of it was, but that's the story anyway. That's historically speaking, that's the story. So you wonder, it's of course been bannered about the Twitter sphere that perhaps Trump has the free energy and as part of his making America great again and putting a dagger in the heart of the deep state is going to release that technology. Now, I, of course, don't know. I do know the part where his uncle certainly was, this is confirmed by numerous sources, that his uncle was involved in that whole thing with Tesla. Whether Trump's going to release the free energy or not, I don't know. But I think that would probably, if he was going to do it, I would think that right now in history, David, would be about the best time he could probably do it, because if we could somehow harness that free energy like he's talked about, that the technology, the patents have been available, if we can utilize that right now, that would really be a helpful feature, to say the least, to be able to help pull us through this grand solar minimum. What say you about that?
Just a quick point on that. If we were to have access to free energy at the moment, the dire predictions for billions and billions of people to die starving, cannibalizing each other, disease, and just outright violence to stay alive another day could be avoided, because if we had free energy, we would have the energy to heat buildings, to grow food indoors. We would have the free energy to run pumps as long as we want for water. We could filter it. We could recirculate it. No problem. We'd have the light for all the LEDs. Even if you'd used like CFL or even old bulbs that consumed an enormous amount of power, wouldn't matter because it's free. The water, we could, you sterilize that. How about refrigeration after post-harvest? I mean, refrigerators take an enormous amount of power to run, but if it was free, it wouldn't matter because your food costs would get driven down. What about the storage, longer-term food storage? What about packing it during the packaging process? How much, electricity or power does a factory use to run this? And how about the shipping itself? If we had free power, we could move this stuff across the planet or across the regional region. Having free energy in terms of electricity and also fuels that could allow us to do all these things for nothing, literally nothing. And we would be able to grow food for an entire world so easily. The only constraint right now is, what you talked about, the investment capital in and also the running costs out. Because currently to grow, whatever you would do indoors, it's going to cost you more money at the point right now because you can still get things more cheaply. But if all your power was free, that would be a completely different ballgame. You would come way underpriced with the indoor grown stuff than you would outdoors at the moment, because fertilizers, I don't know how you could, if free energy, you still got to produce a thing out of the fertilizer. So, there's some things that do require a physical substance still. Oil is going to be needed as in a physical. Energy is one thing, but plastics and fertilizers and these kind of things, medicines, etc., they need physical substance. But in terms of driving the whole thing and like making it work, free energy, our world, that problem is solved. We don't depopulate.
And since I have been talking about our need moving forward in this new society that we're entering as our global grain production starts to be reduced in yield, your food prices are going to skyrocket. And I mean skyrocket, not just doubling or tripling, something like 5 or 10 times higher by 2020 at the very least. TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. They've been around since 1974, heirloom and organic seeds. You know, since I've started talking about them in my videos, I have a lot of people write and say that they've previously ordered, that they know the owner, having great results, good customer service. They quite enjoyed the seed quality as well. And there's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. You know, microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. And we know the benefits of microgreens. All you have to do is use a search engine and look up vitamin, mineral, nutrient content of microgreens. You'll be shocked. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. And not only that, they have wheatgrass and grain seeds. So when I'm talking about grain growing regions going offline, we just need to look back in history and see where across the planet there was difficulty growing grains when this grand solar minimum intensified and the jet stream started wandering just like they're doing today due to a decreased magnetosphere that does not hold our jet streams locked in their traditional flows. Grains are one thing, herb seeds are another, cover crops, something different, but whatever you do, organic seeds are going to be a necessity because you can save those seeds and then grow them the next season, which you unequivocally cannot do with GMO. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
In my last episode, I was talking something very similar to what I've been talking with James White here on today's program, founder and editor of NorthwestLibertyNews.com and also the Northwest Liberty News YouTube channel. We were talking about the narrative shifting, how the media is going to try to control what you see or how you view reality as we move from this point forward through high food prices, crop losses, extreme weather changes, and now the global corporate media coming out talking about ice age, mini ice age, grand solar minimum, global cooling. And I'm going to read you a news headline here to start off with. We're over on electroverse.net today. Global warming protests called off in Russia. Too cold, minus 47 degrees Fahrenheit. And they're telling us it's all about it's too hot. We got to cool everything. And this whole ridiculous, and talking about government intervention into society and populations as the food prices get too expensive and the basic necessities through food assistance programs won't be met for a basic portion at the lower population of the economic strata of each country of the world. Not a problem. But now they're talking about spraying sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere to cool the planet. Now, what I signal here is global media is coming out saying mini ice age, planet's going to cool, global cooling. At the same time, they're saying sulfur dioxide spraying in the atmosphere. So I'm going to see an intersection here somewhere in the very near future, like 1 or 2 years, and they'll be like, well, we were actually doing it in secret, but we didn't want to tell you because we didn't want to scare you. But look, it worked. We were able to cool the planet down, and they're going to try to take credit for it. I can already see the writing on the wall. And those will go, oh, yay, we need to keep spraying. It's still CO2. I don't believe it's anything from the sun. Now, wait a second. Sulfur dioxide, I thought we were trying to stop sulfur dioxide, acid rain, and now they want to spray it in the atmosphere. That's way different than the nanometals from geoengineering to ionize the atmosphere at a greater capacity to bounce radio signals for the military. Two different animals, A and B. James, what do you think about that?
Here's the thing that I think that we have going for us here, David. And I wanted to say earlier, when I said earlier that it's too late, I wasn't trying to be negative. I meant it's too late for the mainstream media to have let us all know about this, which shouldn't surprise any of us. But I think the good thing that we have going for us here is the narrative. I mean, there's a lot of positives. You talked about it earlier. Even for people like us to come up with alternative news programs, there's even opportunities out there for things like that. Because I was going to say it earlier, the thing we have going for us, David, is they don't have the grip on information, and they don't control the information narrative like they used to. They still control a lot of it, don't get me wrong. But it's hard to control like independent people like you and myself and many others that are just going out there independently expressing what they've experienced or what they currently see or what's going on in their town. You can't stop. You can't, unless you shut everything down, which I know they're trying to. And I'd like to talk, if we can, a little bit about it. I'm not sure if you're following the news over here. I don't think they have the same grip on the narrative as they used to, David. So I believe that they're still going to try to spread lies and false information, but I just don't know if they're going to be as successful as they were before. This is really, we really are going through, and as I said, there's some positive things. I believe we're going through a great awakening right now in a lot of ways. How that's going to manifest itself in relation to the Grand Solar Minimum, I don't know. I wish I did, but I do know that we are not, I think, as blind, at least a lot of us, as we were before, to really the lies and the fabrications of the establishment. What do you think about that? Do you think the same?
Well, I think a lot of people are awakened, but they don't speak. They're biting their tongue because they see the viper's nest that they're in around. I think there's a lot more awareness and awakened mind out there than is let on to, just because you can kind of see the direction of everything where they're trying to compile now lists of banned speech for universities, etc. Hey, if you don't agree with me, because I say global cooling, that should not be a trigger hate speech word that should be banned across the university. Just because you don't agree with me, let's have a debate. Let's talk about it. No. So they just got to silence it. This is the new thing. There's no longer talking about anything. It's just pure silencing and removing the threat at any cost, whether it be jobs, personal ad hominems, wherever they can find somebody on the net and then go after their employer. So I think people have really taken a quick understanding that, you just don't speak your mind these days too much, although you may know much, much more, just because of the blowback, if you will, that's out there off the new socialist/communist regime that's trying to form itself in the United States. And for those of you out there listening, I used to live in China. I worked in China. That was one of my very first jobs after I moved over to Asia. I went to university in China for a year, studied Chinese, and then I got a job as a factory acquisition agent. I tell you what I see in the United States after reading, I was a real big fan of history, ancient history. I love it. That's one of the main reasons I went to China, was for the ancient history. I wanted to learn about, and that's what brought me in. Hey, there's a lot of cycles happening here. I understood the cycles before I understood the Grand Solar Minimum, but then it overlapped, and I already had the base layer there for China.
And I do thank Hemp Lucid for making this production possible. The most wholesome and most potent raw hemp extractions available. You can see the full range of their products at hemplucid.com. You'll be amazed at the balance you feel.